Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into three huge stories that have shaped how the Western world thinks about one of the most powerful feelings we have: guilt.
It's something we all experience, right? This nagging feeling of being flawed, of having done something wrong. It's something theologians, philosophers, and psychologists have wrestled with for centuries. So where does it come from?
To really get a handle on our modern anxieties, that constant pressure to be better, that feeling of not being good enough, we need to look at the powerful origin stories our culture tells itself about where all this guilt started.
Now, these aren't just dusty old tales or abstract theories. You can think of them as competing cultural operating systems. They're running in the background of our society, shaping how we see ourselves in ways we might not even realize.
So, let's start with the big one. This is arguably the most influential story in the entire Western world, the Christian idea that we are all born with a fundamental, inherited flaw.
So you've got the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis, right? That's the seed. But it was the Apostle Paul who really took that story and turned it into a universal human condition. He argued that Adam's one mistake didn't just affect him, it infected the entire human race with sin and death.
And here is the absolute key to this whole idea. Guilt, in this view, isn't really about something you did. It's about the state you are born into. You don't become a sinner because you sin because you were born a sinner. It's a heck of a starting point.
So the next logical question is, how did this state get passed down through the generations? Well, a hugely influential thinker, St. Augustine, had an answer. He basically pinpointed the act of procreation. He argued that after the fall, human desire, especially lust, what he called concupiscence, was out of control. And that disordered desire became the physical vehicle for transmitting this spiritual flaw.
So the takeaway from this first story is pretty intense. Our human nature isn't just a little wounded, it's corrupt from the get-go. Augustine even used the Latin phrase massa damnata, a condemned mass, to describe humanity. From this perspective, we can't save ourselves, we are totally dependent on divine grace.
Okay, now let's jump forward about 1,500 years to a completely different story. This one doesn't see our guilt as a fall from grace, but as the deep psychological echo of an ancient and terrible crime.
Enter Sigmund Freud. And, he made no bones about it. He wanted to completely dismantle the religious explanation for guilt and build a new, scientific one in its place. He wanted to turn the concept of sin into a neurosis, something you could analyze and hopefully understand.
So he came up with this pretty wild speculative origin story. Picture this. Way back in prehistoric times, a dominant father figure keeps all the women for himself. His sons, furious, team up, kill him, and even eat him. But then they're crushed by this overwhelming guilt. So what do? They internalize his authority, creating what Freud called the superego, that little voice in your head, the source of all our morality and, all that nagging guilt.
But Freud was really just the beginning. His followers took this idea of a fractured self and ran with it. For Carl Jung, the problem wasn't some ancient murder, but our personal failure to accept our shadow, the dark parts of our personality. His goal was integration. Then you get Jacques Lacan, who said the flaw comes from the moment we learn language. He argued that entering the world of words and symbols cuts us off from a state of pure being, creating a permanent sense of lack. All these theories are trying to explain why we feel so incomplete.
So we've had the inherited fall, and we've had the primal crime. But what if there's a third way? What if we aren't born fundamentally broken or psychically guilty? Well, there's another ancient story that offers a totally different perspective.
The Jewish theological tradition just completely rejects the idea of original sin. It doesn't buy it. In this view, humanity isn't corrupted by something that happened in the distant past. Instead, life is defined by a constant internal struggle. You aren't born a sinner, you're born a struggler.
At the very heart of this idea are two competing inclinations that God put inside every one of us. The first one is called the yetzer hara. Now, that often gets translated as the evil inclination, which sounds pretty bad, right? But it's not a demon. It's our natural, God-given drive for things like survival, ambition, and physical desire. It's our selfish side.
And here is the part that is so fascinating. In this worldview, the yetzer hara is not something you're supposed to crush or destroy. In fact, rabbinic thinkers argued that without it, civilization would just stop. No one would build a house, get married, or start a business. It's the engine of human progress.
So the whole point of life in this framework isn't about being saved from a fallen nature. It's about actively managing this built-in creative tension. The goal is to take the powerful energy of the yetzer hara and channel it for good,
guided by its counterpart, the yetzer hatov, the good inclination. It's a lifelong ethical balancing act.
Okay, so we've got these three powerful stories, the fall, the crime, and the struggle. You might be thinking, these are really old ideas. What do they have to do with me today? Well, it turns out a lot. Their influence is everywhere, even if we don't see it.
Think about it. That deep-seated feeling that we're not good enough didn't just vanish when people became less religious. It just secularized. It created this huge, modern market for self-help, for wellness, for consumer products, all of them promising to fix what we feel is fundamentally broken about us.
And you can see the blueprint of this thinking in our political conversations, too. Whenever you hear people talk about a nation's original sin, like slavery in America, they're using the exact same structure as the fall. It's the idea of a crime committed long ago whose guilty consequences are inherited by every generation that follows.
So, when you peel it all back, understanding these origin stories helps us see the hidden blueprints for our society, our culture, and even for how we see ourselves. So the question to leave you with is, fallen, fractured, or struggling, which one of these stories do you think is running in the background of your life?